The Federal Chancellor has an outstanding position in the federal government in Germany. It's the so-called Chancellor principle. It's shown in that he's the only member of the federal government elected by the Bundestag, the federal parliament, and thus has a special democratic legitimacy. He may petition alone for the Bundestag to express its confidence in him or her. He has the refusal of the vote of confidence can lead to new elections, and he can be overthrown solely by a vote of no confidence, whereby all his ministers lose their office. And he has the right to propose the federal ministers for appointment and dismissal, while Parliament cannot force a minister to resign. And he determines the policy guidelines and is solely responsible for them. Policy competence is the principal authority of the Chancellor. It assigns him leadership in the cabinet. He cannot be overruled by a majority in the cabinet. The Constitution gives the Chancellor the opportunity to keep his cabinet tight. Now he uses them, or how he uses them, depends on his personality, the support of his party and faction, and the weight of his coalition partners. The first Federal Chancellor, that was Konrad Adenauer from 1949 to 1963, had such an undisputed position of power that for his reign the slogan was coined by the Chancellor democracy. Looking back, it can be seen that Adenauer's strong position was not so much derived from the competence of the directive, but was due to his personality and the political constellation. The subsequent chancellors have used their competence in directives in very different ways, depending on the political situation and their personal leadership style. But what are the tasks of the Federal Chancellor? The Basic Law, which is the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Germany, provides for the office of Chancellor a very strong position. Thus, the Chancellor has under Article 64 of the Basic Law the right to form the federal cabinet. The Chancellor proposes to the Federal President the candidates for the ministerial posts and thus the members of the federal cabinet. The dismissal of the federal ministers is possible in the same way. In addition, the Federal Chancellor chairs the Federal Cabinet and heads the cabinet meetings. So he is the leader there. There is a framework for government action, though. According to Article 65, the Federal Chancellor determines the guidelines of government policy and also bears the responsibility for doing so. This policy competence involves setting a framework for government action that each ministry completes with content. Within the guidelines determined by the Federal Chancellor, each federal minister has his own business independently and under his own responsibility. This way of working is called the department principle. Usually, agreements with government partners are necessary in Germany. The Federal Chancellor heads the business of the federal government according to rules of procedure approved by the Federal Cabinet and approved by the Federal President. He is responsible to the Federal Parliament. Often governments consist of coalitions that are entered into by two or more parties in order to have a majority in the Bundestag. Within this governing coalition, the Chancellor is bound by the agreements with the government partners if he does not want to burden the alliance unnecessarily. At the moment we have a three-party coalition. The Vice-Chancellor is usually a coalition partner. The Chancellor also decides on his or her deputies. This office is taken over by a federal minister. If it is a coalition government, usually a party member of the governing partner is appointed as deputy. At the moment it's a Green. In peacetime, the Chancellor is, by the way, not the commander-in-chief. In the case of defense, the Chancellor has to command the armed forces, but not in peacetime. A Chancellor, by the way, cannot be dismissed easily. With the help of the vote of no confidence, the Chancellor can make sure that his or her policy is supported by the Federal Parliament, the Bundestag. If the petition does not reach a majority vote of the MPs, the Federal Chancellor can propose the dissolution of the Parliament to the Federal President. However, this right expires if the Bundestag elects a new Chancellor by a majority of its members. And that's the only way to get rid of a chancellor, by electing a new chancellor. The parliament cannot kick the chancellor out and then we have none. No, the only way they can do this is by electing a new chancellor. It happened in the beginning of the 1980s when, while we had Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, Parliament elected Helmut Kohl as Chancellor. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.